The flight was almost full when she walked down the aisle, holding her small carry-on bag close to her side. She looked like any normal traveler. Her clothes were simple, her hair tied back, and there was nothing about her that made anyone turn their head. She quietly took her seat in 14C, placed her bag under the seat, and looked out of the window for a moment, as if trying to calm her breathing. No one knew who she really was. No one knew what she had once done. And no one knew what she had sworn she would never do again. To the passengers around her, she seemed like a shy woman who didn't talk much. She nodded politely when a child dropped his toy near her feet. She gently smiled when an elderly man asked her to help with his seatbelt. Everything about her was soft, quiet, and peaceful. But inside her chest, something old and heavy slept like a locked iron door. The plane moved back from the gate, and the cabin crew began their safety demonstration. She watched with a calm face, though her fingers pressed lightly into her armrest. She didn't like flying anymore, not after what she had seen in the past. Still, she breathed slowly and kept her emotions hidden. In the seat behind her, a man sat with a newspaper folded on his lap. No one paid attention to him. Why would they? He looked like a simple office worker wearing a plain jacket and reading glasses, but he wasn't an office worker. He wasn't even traveling for personal reasons. He was the Air Marshal assigned to this flight. He kept scanning the cabin every few minutes, watching faces, small movements, and details others ignored. That was his duty. That was why he noticed something unusual about the woman in 14C, not her face, not her posture. Something else. The way she scanned the aisle before sitting. The way she noticed every exit without turning her head. The way her hand hovered over the seat back in front of her as if she was checking for stability. These were small signs, but signs only a trained person makes. The plane lifted off the runway and the engines roared. She closed her eyes for a second and gripped the armrest again, steadying herself. Her breathing stayed slow, controlled, almost too controlled. The Air Marshal watched her from behind, narrowing his eyes slightly. He had seen this kind of breathing before. Not fear, not panic. Discipline. The kind taught to people who had once lived through danger. An hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Passengers relaxed, some slept, and others scrolled through their phones. The woman in 14C simply rested her head back and looked straight ahead, lost in her own world. The Air Marshal unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up casually. He pretended he was going to the restroom, but instead he paused near her row. He leaned, just slightly, as if he had dropped something. In reality, he was trying to get a closer look at her face. Something about her eyes seemed familiar. She noticed him. Without turning, without lifting her head, she sensed him standing there. Her shoulders tightened for a brief second, so quick that only someone trained like her or him would notice. He whispered softly, so only she could hear, "Is that you?" "Hawk." Her heart thumped once, hard. No one on the plane reacted. No one else heard that name, but she did. And she froze. For a moment her breath stopped. Her fingers curled around the armrest, and a shadow passed through her eyes, something sharp and painful from her past. She slowly looked up at him, her face pale, her expression guarded. No one had called her that name in years. She had buried it deep. She had walked away from a world where that call sign meant life and death. She had promised she would never return to it, but this man knew. He didn't smile, didn't show surprise. He simply looked at her with the quiet recognition of someone who understood exactly what that name meant. "How did you?" she whispered, but her voice trembled slightly. She hated that tremble. She wasn't the kind of person who trembled. "You trained me," he replied softly. Her eyes widened just a little. Now she understood why his movements felt familiar, why his posture was precise, why his scan of the cabin looked professional. He wasn't just an air marshal, he was one of hers, or he had been, long ago. "I need you to listen carefully," he said in a low voice. still pretending he was just shifting his position. There's someone on this flight who shouldn't be. Someone dangerous. Her pulse changed. Slow, steady, trained, no fear. Only alertness. She shook her head quietly. I'm not involved anymore. I know, he whispered. But this isn't something I can handle alone. She breathed out slowly. Her old instincts, the ones she had tried to bury, pushed against the door she had locked years ago. She didn't want this. But the Air Marshal looked at her with the eyes of a man who knew the situation better than she did. And then he whispered the words she hoped she would never hear again. Hawk, we need you. She didn't answer him at first. She just stared straight ahead, her face calm but her mind suddenly awake like a soldier hearing a forgotten alarm. The engine hum filled the silence between them. Passengers were relaxed, unaware that something dangerous was happening around them. Hawk, please, the Air Marshal whispered again, his voice almost breathless. You were the best. If anyone can help before things get worse, it's you. She blinked slowly. She could hear fear in his voice, not loud fear, but the kind that hides deep in the tone of someone trained not to panic. He wasn't asking because of respect. He was asking because he truly needed help. She kept her voice low. Tell me everything. Quickly, he nodded. Seat 7, the person there boarded under a false identity. The system flagged it. But after, the plane already took off. She didn't react, but her jaw tightened. What else? She asked. He keeps checking the overhead bins, the marshal said quietly. 3 times already. His bag could be nothing. Or it could be something serious. She understood what he meant without him saying the word. On a flight 30,000 feet above the ground, even a small threat could turn into disaster. I've been watching him, the marshal continued, but I think he knows I'm law enforcement. He avoids looking in my direction. A quiet breath escaped her. Not fear, calculation. She closed her eyes for a moment. She had promised she would leave all of this behind. She had promised that she would be a normal person. But at that moment, sitting in 14C, she realized something painful. She had never truly stopped being who she was. She opened her eyes again. Did he talk to anyone? No, the marshal answered. He looks calm. Too calm, like he's waiting for something. She felt a sharp pull inside her chest. Waiting. Waiting was always a bad sign. Does the crew know? She whispered. He hesitated. No, I didn't want to cause panic. She nodded slowly. Good decision. She took a long, steady breath, and finally said the words she didn't want to say, but knew she must. Okay, I'll help. But you stay calm. Don't look at me again. Don't act differently. If he senses pressure, he might react early. The Air Marshal nodded once, small, respectful, then moved away as if he was simply stretching his legs. He walked toward the front of the plane, pretending nothing was wrong. She leaned back in her seat and exhaled very quietly. Her heart was no longer heavy. It was focused. Old training slowly returned inside her, like muscles remembering how to move after a long sleep. She began watching everything, every row, every movement, every detail the normal eye skipped. The man in 7, the crew, the passengers, the bags, the timing. She watched the reflection in the window beside her, using it like a mirror without turning her head. And then she saw it. The man in 7 shifted his position, opened the overhead bin above him again, looked into his bag, closed it, and sat down. But his right hand stayed pressed against the bag longer than necessary. Not checking, not adjusting, feeling. Her pulse slowed intentionally. She counted the seconds between each action. Patterns mattered. Then something even more concerning happened. The man turned his head slightly and stared toward the back of the plane, not long, not obvious. But his eyes scanned the rows behind him with purpose. He wasn't searching for the marshal. He was searching for someone else. Even though she sat quietly, Her body stayed perfectly still. But her mind sharpened. Why her? How could he know who she was? Unless... She swallowed softly. Unless he had been expecting someone like her to be on this plane. Her hand slowly moved to the small bag under her seat. She didn't open it. She only confirmed that it was placed correctly and easily reachable if needed. She always sat in the aisle seat. Always kept her bag under the seat. Always maintained access. Old habits. The habits she thought she had left behind. A flight attendant walked past, offering refreshments. She smiled politely and declined. Her face looked calm, gentle, normal. Inside, she was counting heartbeats. Air Marshal walked by again, acting like he was responding to a crew question. He didn't look at her, didn't whisper anything. But as he passed, he dropped a folded napkin near her foot, so quietly that no one around noticed. She picked it up casually. 2 words were written in tiny handwriting. "He saw you." Her chest tightened for a second. So her instincts were right. She looked forward again slowly. The man in 7A was no longer scanning the cabin. He was sitting still now. Too still. And then he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. Just one small movement. But enough for her to see the metallic glint under his wrist. A hidden trigger device. Her breath stopped for half a second. If he pressed that trigger, even by mistake, the plane would not survive it. She closed her eyes, calming herself the way she once did before entering the most dangerous missions of her life. She whispered only 2 words under her breath, words she never wanted to say again. Not today. When she opened her eyes again, her old self-hawk had fully returned, and the man in 7A had no idea that his biggest threat was the quiet woman in 14C. Asterisk. The woman in 14C did not move for a long moment. She kept her breathing slow, steady, controlled. She knew she had only 2 goals now: understand the threat and stop it without alerting the passengers. It was a thin line. One wrong move, and the entire plane could fall into chaos. Her eyes stayed forward, but her mind was already working, trying to understand the man in 7A. If he had a trigger device, then he was not impulsive. People with such devices did not rely on chance. They planned. They prepared. They studied everything before making a move. So why had he looked at her? Why her, when she looked like a normal passenger? She sensed the answer forming, cold and heavy. Maybe he hadn't recognized her face. Maybe he recognized her behavior. The same way the marshal noticed. A trained eye sees another trained eye. She sighed softly, almost invisible to anyone around her. She needed to get closer to the man in 7A, but she couldn't walk straight to him. It had to look natural. She waited, patiently, pretending to read the safety card in the seat pocket. Her eyes were not on the words. They were on the reflection in the glossy plastic. The man shifted again. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. He was waiting for something. Or someone. The woman picked up her plastic water cup and stood slowly. She stepped into the aisle like she was simply stretching her legs. A few passengers smiled politely. She gave a small smile back. Everything had to look normal, normal enough that no one suspected anything. As she walked past row 12, she slowed her steps. She didn't turn her head, but she let her peripheral vision scan the area. Row 10, row 9, row 8. And there he was. 7, a dot. She walked naturally, not too fast, not too slow. When she reached row 7, she pretended to pause and look for the restroom sign ahead. Just a normal passenger checking directions. The man in 7A did not look up, but she saw his hand tighten on the armrest. That one small detail told her everything. He knew she was close. He knew she was not just wandering. Her heart beat once, strong and steady. She backed away slowly, not wanting him to feel cornered. When she was far enough, she turned casually, walked toward the restroom, and waited near the galley. A flight attendant walked by. "Ma'am, are you waiting?" She nodded with a friendly smile. Yes, just stretching a little. Her voice remained calm, soft, normal. The attendant moved on, and the woman kept her head down as if checking her phone. She wasn't checking anything. She was listening. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming. From row 7. She felt the air change behind her before she even heard him. The man in 7 was walking toward the restroom too. Her hand tightened around her cup. He wasn't heading for the restroom. He was following her. She turned slightly, just enough to look natural, and saw him approaching. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, studying her, measuring her. The air inside the plane felt heavier. The engine noise seemed distant. "Excuse me," he said softly, stepping closer. His voice was polite. Too polite. She forced a small smile. "Yes? I think you're in my seat," he said. Her eyebrows lifted lightly. "Your seat?" "Yes," he replied slowly. 14C. That one sentence froze her heartbeat. He wasn't talking about seats. He wasn't confused. He was sending a message. He knew who she was. He knew exactly where she sat. She gave a small, polite laugh, acting confused. "No, I think 14C is mine." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Not originally." Her breath caught in her chest. For just a second, this was no random threat. This was targeted. She whispered, "What do you want?" The man's eyes flicked to the cabin behind him, then back at her. "You shouldn't have boarded this flight." She breathed out slowly. "I didn't come for you." "I know," he replied, "but now that you're here, you're a problem." Her fingers curled around the water cup, knuckles tightening. "Where is the device?" He smiled faintly, not with happiness, but with the cold confidence of someone who believed he had already won. "Close," he whispered. "Too close for you to stop." She stepped back just a little, scanning the cabin with her eyes. Passengers were relaxed, unaware that danger was standing only a few feet away. The Air Marshal was seated in the front rows again, pretending to talk with a flight attendant, but keeping his eyes on them. The man leaned forward just enough for only she could hear him. "Walk back to your seat. Sit down. Don't interfere. When the time comes, you won't be able to stop what's coming." Her voice lowered to a whisper. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I do," he said softly. "And you, Hawk, can't stop me." Hearing her old call sign from his mouth felt like ice sinking into her spine. She forced another small smile, one that did not reach her eyes. "Enjoy your flight." She walked away slowly, the cup shaking slightly in her hand, though she tried to hide it. When she reached her seat again, she sat down, breathed deeply, and closed her eyes. She didn't know how he knew her call sign. She didn't know how he found her, but she knew one thing. He had not armed the device yet. If he had, he wouldn't have come to talk. That meant she still had time. Not much, but enough. She opened her eyes, her calm returning. She whispered to herself, "If he wants to play with Hawk, he'll regret it." The battle in the sky had just begun. Asterisk when she sat back in 14C, her body looked calm, but inside her mind, everything moved fast. She replayed the man's words over and over. He knew her call sign. He knew she was a threat to him. That meant this wasn't random at all. Someone had informed him. Or someone wanted her to be on this flight at this exact moment. She didn't. Like either possibility, the Air Marshal slowly walked down the aisle again, pretending to check overhead bins. He didn't look at her, but she knew he was waiting for any sign from her. She tapped her finger once on her armrest, small, quiet, almost invisible. It was a signal. The Marshal understood. He paused 2 aisles behind her, pretending to adjust. "A passenger's bag," she whispered without moving her lips. "He followed me." The Marshal nodded slightly, pretending to talk to the passenger, but she heard the hint of worry in his voice. "He recognized you." "Yes," she whispered, too quickly. The Marshal exhaled softly. "Then this is worse than I thought." She felt a small shiver run through her. The Marshal was trained to stay calm. If he sounded shaken, it meant the danger level had shifted. She kept her eyes on the seat ahead, but her mind scanned every detail she had seen so far. The man's confidence, the device, his warning. Something wasn't matching. People who carried a threat like that didn't walk around casually. They didn't approach targets unless they had backup, or unless they had something bigger behind them. She began searching for a second threat. She looked at row 7 again. There were 2 people sitting beside the man, one reading, one watching. A movie, nothing unusual. But then her attention shifted to the opposite side. Seat 7F. A man sat alone, wearing dark glasses despite the dim cabin lights. His posture was too straight, his hands too still. Her instincts flared. 2 threats, 1 distraction. One with the real task. The man in 7 wasn't alone. He was covering someone else. The Air Marshal returned to his seat, pretending everything was fine, but she knew he was waiting for her next signal. She needed to be sure before she acted. She leaned her head against the seat and watched the reflection on the window again. The man in the dark glasses didn't look around like a normal passenger would. He didn't blink much. He didn't stretch. He didn't speak. He was waiting to ... and then she saw it. One tiny movement that confirmed everything. His hand slid under his jacket slowly, feeling something at his side. Not a weapon, not a trigger. Something heavier. Her pulse stopped for a moment. The real device. The woman breathed out quietly. Her face remained calm, but inside she felt the cold shift of danger rising. She tapped her armrest twice. The Marshal stiffened. He turned a page of a magazine, pretending to read. Again she whispered without moving her lips. 2 threats. 7A is a distraction. 7F is the real one. The Marshal lowered the magazine slightly. Are you sure? Yes, he swallowed. We can't approach both alone. She already knew that. If they tried to confront them directly, the men could act out of panic, and panic at 30,000 feet was deadly. She needed a plan, something clean, something silent, something that didn't alert the rest of the cabin, and she had one. But it was risky, almost reckless. It required absolute timing. 1 second off, and everything could collapse. She closed her eyes. She remembered an old routine one she had used years ago on a similar mission. A mission she had survived only by a miracle. She swore she'd never do it again, but today she had no choice. She stood up slowly, as if simply going to stretch again. The Marshal rubbed his forehead, pretending he wasn't watching her. She walked down the aisle carefully, step by step, past row 10, row 9, row 8, and then row 7. The man in 7A lifted his gaze slightly. His eyes hardened when he saw her approaching again. He knew she wasn't obeying his warning. She didn't look at him. She walked past, pretending not to notice. But her steps slowed for half a second, just enough to map his posture, the angle of his arms, the distance to the device. Then she reached row 7F. The man in the dark glasses didn't move, but she felt the tension in the air. Her hand brushed the seat as she pretended to shift her balance. In that heartbeat, she saw what he had hidden under his jacket. A cylindrical object. Black tape. A wire. Her blood froze for 1 second. It wasn't just a device. It was active. And then the worst realization hit her. It wasn't meant to explode inside the cabin. It was meant to control something outside. Remote high-altitude signal jammer. If activated, the plane would lose all communication with ground control. No help, no response, no warning. The man in 7F had the power to isolate the entire aircraft. She inhaled slowly, keeping her face calm. She turned, walked toward the restroom again. Not too fast, not too slow. But her heartbeat thundered now. This wasn't just a threat. This was a planned operation, and she had walked right into the middle of it. When she reached the galley again, she leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply. She wasn't just fighting. For this flight now, she was fighting something bigger, something that could affect far more than one plane. And for the first time since boarding, she whispered something she rarely allowed herself to say. "This is going to get bad." She stood in the galley for a moment, pretending to wait for the restroom again. But her mind raced at a speed she hadn't felt for years. A high-altitude signal jammer wasn't a small threat. If activated, it would block the plane from contacting ground control, but more importantly, it would confuse the aircraft's own systems. The navigation signals could glitch. Autopilot could malfunction. The crew would be flying blind. It could turn the flight into a drifting metal shadow, lost in the sky. She closed her eyes for a second to steady her breathing. The weight of responsibility settled onto her shoulders again, heavy but familiar. The Air Marshal approached quietly, holding a cup of coffee to make it look natural. "What did you see?" she whispered. "A jammer. Active. Under 7F's jacket." The Marshal's fingers tightened around the cup. "If that goes live..." "No," she cut in softly. The plane becomes silent. He swallowed. "Do we have time?" "Maybe minutes," she replied. "Maybe less." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They both understood how little room there was to make a mistake. She brushed a hand through her hair, thinking, "We can't take him down in the aisle. Too risky. Passengers will panic. He might activate it by reflex. Then what do we do?" He whispered. She didn't answer. Her eyes moved to the small beverage cart beside her. Something clicked inside her mind, an idea. Dangerous, unpredictable, but possible. This plane has a pressure-sensitive storage panel in the front galley, she whispered. If someone hits it hard enough, alarms trigger in the cockpit. The Marshal blinked. And the cockpit crew will call us, she whispered. They'll ask what's happening. That gives us an official reason to approach 7F without raising suspicion. The Marshal shook his head slowly. But he'll see us coming. Yes, she agreed. But he won't expect why. The Marshal hesitated. Are you sure? No, she answered honestly. But it's all we have. She stepped closer to the cart and pretended to adjust a bottle on it. Then she pushed her elbow into the storage panel quietly but hard. A soft metallic thump echoed behind it, a beat of silence. Then she heard it, a soft ding from the cockpit door. A crew member hurried forward, opened the cockpit phone line, and spoke quietly. After a moment, she turned her head slightly toward the passengers. Is everything okay in the front galley? Perfect. The Marshal stepped toward her and pretended to examine the storage compartment. It's a little loose, he said in a CLN tone. Might have shifted during takeoff. I'll take a look. The flight attendant nodded. Just make sure everything is secure. Captains felt vibration. The Marshal nodded again, keeping the act going. But the important part had already happened. The suspicious men had seen the interaction. Now, the Marshal had a professional reason to walk through the aisle, past row 7, and check equipment. She breathed out slowly. The plan wasn't perfect, but it created a window small but enough. The Marshal gave her a slight nod, then walked forward down the aisle, pretending to check overhead bins and storage latches. His movements were slow and normal-looking, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. She followed a few rows behind him, pretending she was simply returning to her seat. When he reached row 7, he leaned toward the overhead bin, tapping the latch gently. 7F shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his jacket. She stopped walking. Her breathing slowed. Time stretched out. The Marshal bent closer, pretending to check the bin stability, but his eyes flicked toward her, a silent signal. Now, she stepped forward calmly, but inside she was fully focused, every sense sharp as a blade. Just one row away. 7, suddenly sat upright, eyes alert. He sensed what was coming. The man in 7F subtly pulled the device closer to his chest. Her heartbeats slowed even more. She wasn't afraid. She was measuring distance, timing, angles. She reached row 8. Passengers looked peaceful, unaware that the air around them was tightening like a wire. The marshal tapped the bit again, and in that exact moment the plane shook. Just a small bit of turbulence, but enough to make the passengers gasp softly. Enough to create chaos if someone wasn't steady, but she was steady, and she used it. When the turbulence jolted the plane, she pretended to stumble forward, sharply falling straight into the aisle between the two threats. 7A instinctively reached out to catch her. 7F single quotes as hand froze halfway toward the device. That half-second freeze was all she needed. She fell, but her fall wasn't uncontrolled. It was deliberate. She shifted her weight, grabbed the armrest of 7A's seat, and pulled herself forward just enough to block his movement. Careful. A passenger behind her called out. She used that distraction to press her knee against 7A's leg, locking his ability to stand. And then, before 7F could react, she looked up directly at him, her voice low and sharp. "Don't move." He blinked. He wasn't expecting her to speak like that, not like a passenger, but like someone who had once commanded a room of armed operatives. "You'll never reach that device," she whispered. "Not before I stop you." 7F's eyes widened slightly. Not fear, but realization. She wasn't just a threat. She was trained like him. Or better. For a brief moment, the entire aisle felt frozen. The marshal stepped forward, hand reaching for his concealed restraints. This was the moment. The moment everything could fall apart. Or everything could be saved. For a full second, the aisle felt like it had stopped breathing. No one around them understood what was truly happening, but everyone felt the sudden change in the air. The woman in 14C kept her body low, her knee still pressing against 7A's leg, blocking him from rising. The man in 7F kept his hand frozen near the jammer under his jacket. The Air Marshal was only one step behind, but he didn't dare move too quickly. One wrong move and the device could activate. She inhaled slowly. The turbulence had stopped, yet the shaking inside her chest felt stronger. Not from fear, but from the weight of time running out. The man in 7F spoke first. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. "You won't make it out of this, Hawk." She didn't blink. "Maybe, but neither will you." 7A tried to shift under her knee, but she pressed a little harder, forcing him still. Passengers were whispering now. They thought she had slipped, nothing more. To them, this was a clumsy moment. To her, it was everything. 7F single quotes S jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come back. You walked away. You were supposed to stay gone." Her eyes narrowed. "So this is personal." He smiled slightly. "Everything is personal in the sky." She didn't take the bait. "Who sent you?" "You already know," he whispered. "Someone who remembers what you were and what you did." Her fingers tightened around the seat beside her. She hated how familiar his tone felt, like he wasn't speaking to a stranger, but to someone he had studied for years. The marshal stepped forward just a little, but 7F's hand twitched toward his jacket. "Don't," she said sharply. The marshal froze. She shifted her body again, creating a small barrier between the device and the marshal, forcing the threat to focus on her instead. That was good. She needed him to look only at her. 7F tilted his head. "Why protect him? You don't even know who he is." "I trained him," she said simply. "That's enough." 7F exhaled through his nose, amused. "Always the same. Always trying to save people." "And you?" she said. "Always trying to destroy them?" His smile faded. She watched his hand closely. Slowly, carefully, he pressed his fingers against the outline of the jammer beneath his jacket. The pressure of his hand sent a quiet threat through the air. "One signal," he said, "and this plane disappears from every radar. No one finds you. No one finds us." She breathed out softly. "I'm not letting you touch that switch. And how will you stop me?" He whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she let her weight fall just slightly onto the armrest, enough to shift the balance of her body, but not enough for him to notice what she was truly preparing. Behind him, a flight attendant approached the row with a confused face. "Excuse me is everything," 7F snapped, his eyes toward the attendant. Just a second. But 1 second was all she needed. She moved. Not fast. Not violent. Controlled. Her hand shot forward, pressing against his wrist with a firm, quiet grip. She didn't try to push him away. Instead, she forced his wrist inward toward his own chest, locking the device between his ribs and his arm, a position where he couldn't activate it without breaking his own wrist. He gasped softly, surprised by the angle. The marshal saw the opening. He moved with quiet precision, grabbing 7A's shoulders and pulling him backward over the seat. The man struggled, but the marshal was trained and angry that passengers had almost been hurt. Still, the bigger problem was 7F. He stared at her, eyes burning. "You think this is enough? You think I can't push through pain? You can," she said quietly. "But not before I break your shoulder." His muscles tightened in resistance. She tightened her grip. Passengers around them gasped softly, still thinking it was just turbulence or a small argument. No one screamed. No one panicked. Good. She needed this silence. 7F leaned forward slightly, testing her strength. "You don't want this fight." "I don't want any fight," she whispered. "But I'll finish it." The marshal looked at her, unsure of what to do next. She nodded once small, but confident. The marshal reached under 7F's jacket carefully, trying to slip his fingers toward the device. 7F jerked slightly, but she held him firm. "Stay still," she said. "One wrong move and we all go down." "I don't fear going down," he whispered. "But you fear failing," she replied. "I can see it in your eyes." That finally cracked something in him. His expression changed, not fully, but enough to show frustration. He pushed harder. She pushed harder back. Their arms trembled with tension, silent but fierce. Then she said something only someone like him would understand. "You weren't trained for close engagement. You were trained for distance work. I can see it in your stance. I can feel it in your arm." His jaw tightened. "You're out of your environment," she said softly. "But I'm in mine." Before he could respond, she twisted her wrist slightly, just a few degrees. A sharp click sounded inside. His shoulder. He gasped. The jammer slipped from under his jacket. The marshal grabbed it instantly. Passengers looked up. Confused, she released 7F's wrist and let him fall back into his seat. His arm limp. The threat wasn't over yet, not fully, because she knew something 7F had not said yet. There was always a second plan, always a second device, and she felt it, deep in her instincts. The real danger was still ahead. For a moment, everything felt still. The device was in the marshal's hand. The man in 7F was sitting back with his injured shoulder, breathing sharply through clenched teeth. The passengers around them were confused but calm, thinking it was only a small argument or someone feeling unwell. That was good. As long as no one panicked, she still had a chance to control the situation. But inside her chest, something else was moving, an old instinct telling her the threat wasn't gone. The man in 7F's eyes weren't defeated. They were waiting, watching, calculating. She straightened slowly, scanning him from head to toe. His breathing was uneven now. His injured arm hung uselessly, but the tension in his jaw told her he still believed he had power. She turned to the marshal. "Secure the device. Don't activate anything. Don't press anything." He nodded, slipping it into a safety pouch and clipping the pouch to his belt. His hand shook slightly, but she didn't blame him. The pressure on him had been enormous. 7A was still restrained between the seats, breathing heavily. The marshal tightened his grip. Passengers were whispering now. A few attendants moved forward, sensing something serious. She raised her hand. Gently. "Everything is okay," she said with a calm smile. "Just a small misunderstanding." Her voice was controlled, steady, so steady that even the worried passengers relaxed. Years ago, she learned how to calm a room with just one sentence. Today, that training saved the cabin from panic. But one person didn't relax. The man in 7F. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You think you stopped it?" She didn't answer. She looked into his eyes, reading the truth behind them. He wasn't bluffing. His confidence wasn't coming from bravery. It was coming from knowledge. Knowledge of something she hadn't found yet. "What else is on this plane?" she whispered. He smiled through the pain. "You'll see." Her heart tightened. She turned to the marshal. "Check the rest of his jacket." The marshal obeyed quickly, searching every pocket, every fold of fabric. But he didn't find anything. "No second device," he whispered. She stared at 7F again. "If you're lying, I'll know." He shook his head slowly. "I don't need a second device. I only needed to distract you." Her stomach dropped. Distract. The word echoed like thunder. She turned sharply toward the front of the plane, scanning every row, every seat, every corner she had ignored while focusing on 7F. The passengers looked normal, relaxed, innocent, but now she understood what she had missed. A distraction meant the real threat was somewhere she hadn't checked, somewhere she assumed was safe. The cockpit. Her breath caught. 7F smiled wider. "Now you understand." She didn't waste another second. She turned to the marshal. "Lock him down. Don't let him move. Don't talk to him again. Don't take your eyes off him." The marshal nodded. Still stunned. She moved quickly down the aisle, walking fast but trying not to alarm anyone. A flight attendant stepped into her path. "Ma'am, is something WR?" "There's no time," she whispered. "I need to get to the cockpit." The attendant froze at the urgency in her voice. She stepped aside without another question. As she reached the cockpit door, she knocked twice in the pattern pilots knew, a pattern only insiders used. There was no response. She knocked again. Still nothing. Her heartbeat thumped hard. She lowered her voice. "Captain, it's urgent. Please respond." Silence. Her fingers curled into a fist. Something was wrong, very wrong. She looked at the lock panel. It showed green. The door was unlocked. That never happened mid-flight. She pushed the door open slowly. The sight inside made her freeze. Both pilots were slumped forward, unconscious but breathing. The autopilot was active, but several controls were blinking red. A thin white mist hung in the air, barely visible, but enough for someone trained to recognize. A sleeping aerosol. Her jaw tightened. Someone had sprayed the pilots with a chemical agent. But who? And when? Then she understood. When the turbulence hit. When the flight attendant walked the aisle. When everyone looked away. Someone else had moved near the cockpit. Someone who looked harmless. Someone she had not noticed. She inspected the footwell area and found a tiny metal capsule near the captain's seat. Empty. Used. A tool for fast-release vapor. Her stomach twisted. The cockpit had been attacked while she was busy stopping 7F. That was why 7F had stayed calm. That was why he never panicked when the jammer was taken, because the real strike was happening quietly right in front of everyone. She rushed to the pilots, checking their pulses. Slow but steady. They would recover, but not soon enough. The plane needed someone conscious now, someone who could fly. She swallowed, her throat tight. She hadn't been inside a cockpit in years. She had promised never to return to this seat, but promises didn't matter now. Lives did. She took the captain's headset and spoke softly. "This is a temporary operator. We need immediate altitude." Check. No response. The jammer had blocked partial signals before they seized it. She closed her eyes for 1 second. She sat in the captain's seat. Her hands hovered over the controls. Hands that once guided aircrafts through storms, through battles, through impossible skies. Hands that had been known by one call sign. Hawk. Behind her. The cockpit door clicked softly. She turned. The Air Marshal stood there, breathless. The passengers are safe. The threats are secure. What now? She faced forward again. We land this plane, she whispered. Together. She placed her hands on the controls, fully steady, calm, ready. The sky stretched endlessly ahead of her. She wasn't just a woman in 14C anymore. She was Hawk again, and she was not letting anyone fall today.